Hi, welcome to the Maggie L. Walker Museum in Richmond, Virginia. I am Rebekah Pierce, the author of Murder on 2nd Street, The Jackson Ward Murders. I am excited to be with you today to take you on a slight tour of this historic neighborhood set in my novel in 1929. I decided to create this story when I took a field trip recently to the Black History Museum here in Richmond. And what I discovered when I got to the museum was pictures of an opulent period in American history that I knew nothing about. And being a lover of mysteries, I decided that I would create a story about an affluent Negro neighborhood, and I would put a murder in the middle of all that opulence. Here at the Maggie L. Walker Museum, what you're going to see today is pictures or video shots of a neighborhood that's actually in the novel, Quality Row. And I hope you enjoy what you're about to see, and I hope you take a look at Barnes & Nobles for Nook and the Amazon Kindle to find the book Murder on 2nd Street. Author of Murder on 2nd Street, The Jackson Ward Murders. And in the novel, it is set in historic Jackson Ward. And this street here that I'm standing on is called Quality Row. And in the novel, this is where most of the action takes place, where we see our protagonist, Cy Sanford, travel up and down, investigating and interviewing people. Over here is the A.D. Price Funeral Home, where the major party or ball is portrayed in the novel. And further down, you'll see the architectural style of these houses show you why this was called Quality Row, because of its Victorian structures, its old world feel. Now, in the novel, the antagonist or the murderer, his family resides on this street, and this is where Maggie L. Walker, African American, or rather Negro families of the day, of the 1920s, lived on Quality Row. And they would often, this community, it circulated its money to keep it in the ward, and this is how the ward was able to thrive and flourish during the early part of the late 1890s to the 1920s. And so you could own a home on this street and in this neighborhood. And it showed, what this shows in the novel and what this shows in American history is that African American families have always been a part of the American dream. Home ownership was their American dream. Standing here in front of the A.D. Price Funeral Home. Back in the early 1900s, during the setting of my novel, the A.D. Price Funeral Home was not only used for funeral services, but on its second and third floor, the Price family used to rent it out for parties. So in the novel, you will find Cy Sanford attending a huge party called the Black and White Ball. And here he tries to, of course, tail and investigate our killer. But the A.D. Price Funeral Home is historic because it was one of the first African-American funeral home companies to be licensed to embalm. And so I want you to see how the history of this community, how this community, again, circulated its money amongst one another. And this funeral home was one of the most successful and thriving businesses in the ward. On 2nd Street, The Jackson Ward Murders, a historical fiction novel set in 1929 in historic Richmond, Virginia. Behind me is the Hippodrome Theater, the world-famous Hippodrome Theater. And in the novel, as well as in actual history, many of our great entertaining artists came to perform at the Hippodrome Theater. Duke Ellington, Ella Fitzgerald, all these entertainers. Bojangles, who is from Richmond, Virginia, would come to the Hippodrome to entertain. But what we also find in the novel is that I have one of our victims be found behind the Hippodrome Theater. This is also the place where our Negro businessmen and women come to congregate and talk about how they're going to find out who the killer is and to stop him. So welcome to the Hippodrome Theater. So welcome back. I'm Rebekah Lynn Pierce, the author of Murder on 2nd Street, the Jackson Ward Murders, an historical novel set in 1929 in Jackson Ward in Richmond, Virginia. We are in the alleyway between the Taylor Mansion and the Hippodrome Theater. And in the novel, one of the bodies of our women victims is found right here. And this is where Cy Sanford also finds his first clue as to who the killer could possibly be. The question is, will anyone believe him? How did the killer manage to get her body back here? Will Cy be able to solve this case? Behind me is the historic Taylor Mansion. It was built in the early or mid-1800s by a very wealthy landowner here in Richmond. In the novel, what I do is one of our main characters, William Sessions, he lives in the Taylor Mansion. And Mr. Sessions also owns the Hippodrome Theater. So you will see in the novel, oftentimes the Negro businessmen and women congregate here at the theater to try to figure out what they're going to do about these killings. Today, the Taylor Mansion is called the Mansion 526. But what I want you to know that for a very long time here in Richmond, Virginia, this was known as the Taylor Mansion. Are you here? All day long, everyone's busy tagging them down. Hi, Rebekah Pierce, author of Murder on 2nd Street, the Jackson Ward Murders, a historical fiction novel set in historic Richmond, Virginia, and Jackson Ward. I'm standing in front of the famous Lee Street Armory. Built in about the late 1800s, it was built specifically to house and support the Negro veterans of the last war, particularly the Spanish-American and early World War I. It has been a shelter, it has been a school, and it has been a library. And today it's under reconstruction to house the Black History Museum here in Richmond, Virginia. The Lee Street Armory plays a prominent role in the novel, and that this is where we find one of the last bodies. It is also where Cy Sanford confronts Sheriff Mason, the racist, very angry white sheriff in the novel. And this is where Cy finds the official clue to signify that the murderer in Jackson Ward is not a white man, but is one of their very own. This concludes our tour of Jackson Ward in historic Richmond, Virginia. I hope you enjoyed the tour of a couple of the places I took you through, which are featured in my novel, Murder on 2nd Street. We went to the Maggie L. Walker house, we walked down Quality Row, we went to the A.D. Williams Funeral Home. We stopped over at the Hippodrome and the Taylor Mansion and ended with our historic stop at the Lee Street Armory. I hope you enjoyed the tour. I hope you go to Amazon.com or Barnes & Noble, Nook, and get your ebook copy of Murder on 2nd Street, the Jackson Ward Murders, and learn a little bit about the history of this great neighborhood. What I wanted to do with my novel was show you that Richmond, Virginia, Jackson Ward was more than just architecture and one person's story. This is a community that was thriving and prospering in a time in American history when it shouldn't have been, but it was. And so I hope you learn more about this historic neighborhood. Check us out online. You can go to bcudigitallibraries.com or just Google Jackson Ward in Richmond, Virginia, or Murder on 2nd Street, the Jackson Ward Murders by Rebekah Lynn Pierce. Thank you so much, and please shoot me an email, editor@averagegirlmagazine.com, or follow me on Facebook or Twitter, and let me know what you think.